so loud. Dear colleagues, dear forum delegates, I would like to start sharp on time because we have an interesting and challenging discussion in front of us, and we would like to listen to all the speakers. And so let's not delay our start. I'm very happy that we have such a great audience here, a very nice selection of speakers. We will discuss mega events, and I will try to present all the topics and why they're of interest for us, and then I'll present all the speakers. What's a mega event? I define it as events which take place in cities which are of a very large scale, which requires large-scale investments, and which attract global attention, which attract television audience and tourists from all over the world, like Olympic Games, like trade fairs, like sports events. Why are they especially interesting for cities nowadays? Because for the last 2 or 3 decades, they started to be perceived not just as the tools of urban development, as Summer Olympics have shown. If 50 or 60 years ago we didn't have that, we had big parks in Munich, but in Los Angeles, minimum investments were required and minimum construction was performed. But in Barcelona, Olympics were a way to transform the city in terms of both urban space and the economy and developmental trends. In the 90s and 2000s, the competition was quite harsh for the right to hold the Olympic Games. Now the trend is changing. Russia has picked up this wave. We have had the Universiade in Kazan, Olympic Games in Sochi, and now we are preparing for the Football Championship of 2018. Now we would like to talk about the benefits we could get from those events, what the cities could earn on that, and whether or not it makes sense to host such events, and what the cities can do to maximize the benefits which they get from this. So that's the agenda we have to discuss today. Now I would like to present all the speakers of our round table. I will start with the Prime Minister of Moscow government. Thanks for coming. Now we have Mr. Bocharov, who is head of the Department for Science, Industrial Politics, and Entrepreneurship of Moscow, and Mr. Bochkarov, head of the Department for Construction of Moscow. We also have a great number of international and Russian experts on mega events. To the left of me, there is Damon Lavelle, director of the London office of the Populous Architectural Bureau, who has taken part in the London Olympics, in the Sochi Olympics, and so on and so forth. Opposite to me is Valdemar Weiss, vice president of NAI Bekar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name of the company correctly. He's director of the Russian Guild of Managers and Developers. To my right sits Mr. Yevgeny Otnelchenko, partner of PwC in Russia. One other international guest is Mr. McQuire, the founder of the Research Department for Society Cultures from the University of Melbourne, Australia. Thanks for coming. Then there is one more expert, Mrs. Turbina, professor of the University for Social and Political Studies, author of the book City in Theory. We have 2 units. During the first one, we'll talk about the main effects, main benefits which the cities get from mega events. We will have 3 perspectives of that. The second session will bring us one level down. We will look at particular objects and the pluses which we can earn in the process of holding mega events. I will not detract any more of your attention because this session is not really about my interest. And the floor goes to Daniel Lavelle, who will talk about the experience of constructing sports objects and their influence on the urban environment. Thanks.
I will briefly explain and thank you, City of Moscow, for the invitation to speak at this very distinguished conference. A little bit about Populous, very, very briefly. As you mentioned, Dmitry, we've had a lot of experience working here in Russia. We were involved in Sochi, we were involved in Kazan Universiade, we have been involved in the master planning for the Luzhniki Olympic Park here in Moscow, and we're involved in other projects in Moscow. But I'd like to focus on our work in London in the context of recent events in London, because obviously London as a world city, it shares with Moscow many things and many challenges moving forward. And I think perhaps there's, in the recent history of events in London, there's some useful lessons. We look at the history of events, recent history of events. This is just our work. We've worked on a lot of Olympic Games, as you'll see there, FIFA World Cups, other major events, including ones in Russia that I've mentioned. And there's just a few of the sort of logos from those events we've worked on. Major events and their effect on settlement and cities are clearly we have the ancient precedents. The Olympic Games, of course, is well known. Its birthplace in Olympia, in the Peloponnese. In Rome, it doesn't matter really what scale of map of ancient Rome you look at, you see, as I've just indicated here, the effect of the event-specific structures or the venues and how they knit together the social fabric. Moving from antiquity, Rome, there's a continuity from antiquity to the present, obviously. Verona is a particular case that I'm interested in as well, where over the course of 2 millennia, that venue building, that arena, that amphitheatre has been at the very heart of the city. So when we look at an abstract notion of a city, and we'll be talking a lot, I think, about the social aspects, so really kind of go through these slides very quickly, but the venues embedded in the city have a function to impart connectivity, to catalyse those parts of the city where they're found. And whether this abstract diagram is indicating two parts or two sort of paradigms of or morphologies of city, that you have the sort of gridded, built-up dense urban core, and you have the urban edge. And event facilities and events themselves can occur in any of those places, and then start in legacy to knit together. So the effect of the venues that are created for the event tend to catalyse the city, create corridors of activity, and really they're crucial to how we have always thought about cities in Western Europe, and that includes Russia, of course. So the whole evolution of the city begins with that notion of the event building informing the social patterns of the city. Post-World War II London, heavily bombed and heavily interrupted in terms of economic development by World War II. The famous Abercrombie Plan, which after many years of research, tapping into the cultural memory of the city before World War II and purely a social project, actually, it established what a lot of people in London always knew, and that is London, a mega city, is actually a cluster of villages. So it's all about the social layout. And that little bit there is Stratford in the east, where the Olympic Games were held in 2012. And in 2012, part of the long-term strategy that Stratford is part of is the sort of eastward shift of the City of London along the Thames estuary. So you've probably heard of Boris's, our mayor, Boris Johnson, the airport project, Boris Island, I think it was called. That's part of the same sort of thought. So when we look at overall the growth centres, you can see that sort of eastward movement happening there. The red dot on that transport plan is the Stratford hub, the very heart of the 2012 Olympic site. So there's some lessons there about how you need to have your transport networks serving your major event locations. So the other thing about the 2012 Games, and I think Scott's going to be talking a little bit about this as well later, is that it was an Olympic Games that spread out and used the whole city via the use of temporary venues, which then when we look at the legacy of the Games, and I'm going to talk about each of these, O2 Arena, Emirates Stadium, Olympic Stadium, and peripherally the Tate Modern. But going back to those diagrams I was showing before, in terms of the influence of these venues, and I put Tate Modern in that category as well. So that's what the Olympic Park looked like in 2007. Surrounding that mess, going through that mess is a whole bunch of roads, transport networks, railways, waterways, 5 city boroughs, or 5 separate municipalities bordered the site. It was a no man's land, and the challenge was to link it back together, to get rid of the industrial wasteland that it was, remediate it, and create something new, and also plan for legacy. So how do you knit back those 5 boroughs together using the Olympic Games as the tool to do that? And really, an event like the Olympic Games is arguably the only way that you can on that sort of scale, with the sort of budgets that flow with the tournament, with the event. So of course there's a framework for development which comes from the legacy thinking. There's master plans, and as a design practice, again, like in Sochi here in Russia, our company was involved in the bid, in the concept master planning, the detailed master planning, the venue designing, the overlay event planning, and also the legacy planning. We're currently delivering the transformed stadium for West Ham Football Club. So in the legacy situation, only 4 of the venues from a whole bunch of others, it's not working, the red dot, anyway. We'll go through that, but again, here's the legacy diagram with the main stadium in a parkland setting. During the Games, there was a whole bunch of temporary venues, and as I said, that reflected the paradigm for the Games right throughout 2012, where there was a focus on temporary venues on some extraordinary locations in the City of London, Horse Guards Parade for the beach volleyball, etc., etc. The Olympic Park itself, same notion, that many temporary venues. So if you look at the scale of this, the secure perimeter, which is where you can't go inside of unless you have a ticket during the Games, that's the scale of that overlaid on the overall plan, which is that. So that's the Games area. Within that, the venues and the main media facilities, which are very large buildings, as you can imagine as well. Then the then the Athletes Village, which is that area in the centre to the sort of left at the top. Then when we look at where the people are coming from, that's linking back to the transport nodes, which I touched on briefly before. Then the common domain. So this is where, if you've got a ticket to any event in the Olympics, you can use these spaces. So this is the heart of the legacy public realm space, which during the Olympic Games is termed the common domain. Then the spectator facilities, i.e. the stadia, the arenas where you go and watch the sport. Permanent venues, as I said, it goes from that, or more correctly that, all of that stuff has been reduced to that. 4 venues, plus a lot of legacy parkland, plus a lot of legacy public realm, and activated river corridors, linear parks, the whole bit. So, as I say, during the game, on the top there in the centre is the huge Westfield complex, which sits over the transport hub. The other big grey things on the bottom, that's the media buildings, which, as you can imagine, being very highly serviced buildings, very good for high-tech industry now, and that's their legacy. During the Games, temporary venues. The brown blobs, they're the buildings, the temporary arenas, the temporary stadia that we designed and delivered as temporary buildings. Then what goes with that? The other overlay facilities, all of the toilets, all of the merchandising, all of the first aid facilities, and all the rest of it, ticketing, the whole bit, on the city scale, temporary facilities. So it's an integrated urban master plan. That's where it sits looking back at the city, and you can see hopefully how it straddles all of that difficult spaghetti of roads and other transport infrastructure, linking the parks together and linking now for the first time in 100 years, linking those 5 boroughs back together and serving as a framework for future development. To the south of the Olympic Stadium is the O2 Arena. The O2 Arena was also a venue for the Olympic Games. It also was on an old industrial site which nobody had really been able to put together a plan to remediate it. And then essentially during the millennium, it was decided, well, let's reclaim it, let's build this thing, which became the Millennium Dome. Inside the Millennium Dome during the Millennium Year, there was an event, there was a display, it cost about £1 billion at the time, which is a lot more now, of course. But you know, some people said it was successful, some people said it wasn't. Then after that, in the first, in January of 2002, 1 year after the Millennium Year, it became a big, well, white elephant. What do you do with it? Well, fortunately, we were able, as Populous, to be involved in the design of this arena, which created a long-term venue built, and there it is under construction, underneath this tented structure, the largest indoor space in the world. There it is, it's the world's most successful event space, and watch this space because there's one coming to Moscow soon. Obviously a multifunctional arena, all of your sports can happen in there, big concerts. This guy comes to Moscow quite a lot, I know you know him. Then you've got the motorsports in there, you've got all sorts of stuff there. So that's been the catalyst for the regeneration of that whole Greenwich Peninsula. Wembley Stadium, the iconic main venue for the British Empire Exhibition and Games just before the war and then just after the Second World War. The iconic original stadium, sitting in a vast parking lot at the end of a concrete tunnel from, so a very unpleasant place to be, but an iconic stadium. The red is the old stadium on this image, and the new stadium is in the white, so you can see the sort of change in scale there. There it is in that view. There it is looking back from London, so it's an iconic piece of structure on the city skyline. There it is again, and again in the context of the, well, so here's the overall context. It's the Wembley City event space, the heart of a master plan to be delivered in several phases. Phase 1 is almost complete now. The residential phases are just sort of kicking in. Here's some diagrams showing how that's all working. The residential we can see on the Wembley Way there is coming on board. During a major event, those spaces in the public realm area get activated in connection with the particular sporting activity that's going on. There are other public spaces built into the approaches to it. Right next to the stadium now, there's a Hilton Hotel. There's a civic library. So there was no impetus to put such an important facility as this, which is the main library for Brent, in that space, but developing the new public spaces that catalyse that public realm, and then other things follow. So this is the new library. Then you have the corridors of value which grow between the transport hubs and the venue itself. And now it's the main London designer outlet space with cinemas. I've already mentioned the Hilton Hotel, but lots of shopping and all of that's growing around it. And there's just some more images there of the hotel. The other one that you saw briefly on that diagram was Emirates Stadium, which is in North London in Islington. Again, it was a mess of a site. It was a very contaminated site. Here it is after development. You can see the transport and other infrastructure that's been put in there, bridges and so forth, creating connections and linking via that site from one part of the community to the other part. There it is on match day. There it is inside. The public housing that we designed and delivered as part of the stadium project, which is another key thing about regenerating the communities, the office building that goes with it. The old stadium just around the corner is now a luxury housing estate. So that's the regeneration of that particular facility as well. And then again from some other images here, some recent images just showing how, and this was taken from very recent satellite imagery, and you can see how the whole site is now being surrounded by different types of housing. So really, there you are. That's, again, that diagram where that venue that comes with the event catalyses that whole region and potentially creates an opportunity for all sorts of development.
Awesome, Damon. Yeah, thanks for staying on time. A lot of beautiful imagery, and I have, as someone who has lived in London for a while, can totally subscribe to the fact that those venues were transformational for their respective areas, and that Olympics were in fact designed in a very sort of with a lot of thought about how it's taken forward. However, I would have one question for you. I'll keep it to one question per presentation. The question would be the classic, so what? So they're good stadia, they facilitate development. Is it worth hosting Olympics that are 9.1 million in cost, which has ballooned from 2 million to billion pounds?
Yep.
Is that really the way to take that particular plot of land forward? And should that kind of thing be a priority for the city?
Well, as I mentioned briefly, I can not imagine how that whole area of Stratford could have evolved to what it is now without that event. So time will tell, and it depends how you measure these things. And I think there's been a variety of different ways of trying to measure it, from all the way back to Atlanta through, you mentioned Barcelona before, which is everybody's classic sort of example of how things should work, and then Athens is everybody's sort of question mark about, to respond to the core of what you're asking there. It's too early to say in London, really. Maybe Scott can say something about Sydney, because we talked about this before, being an Australian. I'm Australian as well, but anyway, I think Sydney is sort of 50-50, really, in my view. Sochi, well, everything in Sochi is booked out for the next 3 months, so I think it's working. I was there for the Grand Prix in October. Yeah, it was working then. I think it's a huge investment, and the headlines are really, really large numbers associated with Sochi, but from what I've seen, I can hardly imagine another regional city like Sochi being where it is now without that event.
Okay. Очень интересная презентация. Спасибо, Дэймон.
So a very interesting presentation. Thanks for Damon. And so such facilities and such construction works can be a catalyst for certain cities, and we see it as an example of Sochi and London. And I'd like to give the floor to our next speaker. It will be Yelena Trubina, who has a presentation which emphasizes all the events from a different point of view. So, Yelena, please. So, unlike my colleague who represent practical work, I'd like to introduce you to the fact that geographers, social studies scientists, and other scientists dealing with urban development think about the scale of mega events. And I'd like to start with the thesis that mega events accumulate contradictions between national, global, and regional development. And I mean the following. On the one hand, we have a global industry of the organization of mega events, which is controlled by transnational corporations and organizations. And on the other hand, we have national governments which deal with their legitimacy and the enhancement of their own part and their countries due to different economic ambitious mega projects. And on the third hand, all mega events are conducted in cities, and cities do not always win in this contradictive game of different scales on which economic and social and political processes unfold. And to understand the mega event, we have combat different political forces, different political groups involved, and all of them want to control the notion of mega events. And the intermediate result in any discussion of any event as a social welfare, we always find different enthusiastic people, enthusiastic organizers, and we always find skeptical and those who criticize. And we even felt at the beginning of our discussion that there is space for skeptical points of view in the organization of mega events. And this slide represents the most crucial thoughts which can be taken from different urban development literature, and quoting our English colleague Jonathan Griggs, we can say that mega events is a victory of ideology over mind, and we can see that during the implementation of mega events we only see token symbolic revenues, and so the interests of the government and authorities are contradictory to those of the population, and this result was reflected in the book of the sociologist Maurice Roche, in his book dedicated to urban developments, and he calls mega events temporary bridges between elites and masses. And the third point I'd like to emphasize is the following. Economic revenues from mega events are very complicated to be measured. People who try to do that face the stumbling block, and so we can't be sure in talking about their positive features. Mega events are to be discussed today from my point of view, take into account the today's moment, and Mr. Peck called this notion an economical urbanism, and in terms of the continuous economic recession, however hard we need the sources for growth, a mega event can't be regarded at the moment as such. Why? Because the conduction of mega events enhances inequality of development of different cities, and they are so expensive that without public money they are impossible to be conducted. And of course, money allocated for cities hosting these events are taken away from other cities. And these questions arise in different discussions dedicated to mega events. And what can be done on this money allocated for mega events? This is the so-called next best. They can be allocated for social programs, for infrastructure enhancement, and this is good for the local authorities, but the local population loses in such a case, and the renovation of host cities is very expensive. And this burden lies on the shoulders of the city dwellers, and of course these positive emotions, which our English colleagues name feel good, disappear very quickly, and all the new facilities are empty, and we can judge about that in according to the Russian examples. So thank you for being brief, and I'd like to mention that you've raised two crucial issues regarding mega events. The first one, why? Why the cities want to host these mega events? That's their decision, and do we have any right to judge them? The second issue is the following. So what is the second best? What else could the city have done using this money allocated for the mega event? I think this thesis is a good transition to the report of our next speaker, Evgeny Atnelchenko, who will talk about appreciation and measurement of the effect of these mega events. Thanks, Dmitry. First and foremost, I'd like to say why I'm talking about this. Our company has a global practice which is consulting global events, and games in Beijing, London, Vancouver were our clients, and games in Kazan and Sochi were our clients as well. And so we have clients all over the world in the sphere of large-scale events, organizing student games, Olympics, Paralympics, and so we face an issue very often. So on the one hand, we have the society representatives, and on the other hand, we have the organizers. And so all of them ask us, how can we measure the effect? And will the city deal with hosting this event? And how a city can hold accountability in front of the society? Where was this money allocated and how was it spent? So how is it done? First and foremost, we need to understand that the society, mass media are not always fair in regards to the organizers and authorities from the point of view, why is huge money spent for that? For example, if a new hospital is built and a large amount of money is spent, it is approved. But if a large amount of money is spent for the mega event, a lot of contradictions arise, and a lot of people say, should have we spent this money for this purpose? So there are different approaches to the matter. The first one is the measurement of an economic effect. It can be a direct one, it can be an indirect effect in adjacent spheres, in related spheres. For example, if we measure influx of tourists and money coming with them, so the indirect effect will be the work of transport, the work of small-scale business, and so on and so forth. And you can see a lot of examples in the net or on our webpage or on the webpage of the Sport Accord Convention. For example, the benefits for St. Petersburg from the Sport Accord Convention held in 2013. And it will be again held in Sochi in a couple of years. And if we talk about the effect, the journalists are more interested in a money effect, in a direct effect. But it would be unfair, because if you look seriously and from a professional point of view what a city or a country gets from such an event, we'll see that there are huge and very important things which can't be measured in money, in terms of money. For example, making sport more popular or enhancement of the intellectual capital in the city. And it's a serious thing to be mentioned, because we have a lot of new opportunities, a lot of people with new qualification and skills. For example, people who have constructed Sochi have new skills acquired, because it's the first precedent in the Russian Federation for holding such a large-scale event. And these people stay in the country and they can use these skills and knowledge in other spheres. And we can talk about the establishment of the environment comfortable for disabled people. We can talk about the enhancement of standards and so on and so forth. For example, the Olympic movement, which is quite a complicated one and has a long-term history and has a lot of internal regulations and standards, has an approach which is called Olympic Games Input. And it measures the influence of the Olympic Games, and it recommends that all countries who host the Olympic Games should measure a certain number of indicators which can stick to the economic, political, social effect and others, and perhaps adapt them to different territories, and after that measure them in the run of several years before the event and after the event. And in this case, we can be objective, and we can follow the changes in these indicators. For example, money was spent in Sochi, in Kazan, and a lot of years will pass. For example, a lot of decades will pass, and only after that we will be able to say whether it was positive or negative. And the last thing to mention, so what can we do to make the organization of mega events an effective one? First, we need to understand where the city is moving, in which direction is it moving, and after that we will try to embed this mega event in the trend of the development of the city. For example, we have another two moments connected with the intellectual capital. People who organize an event usually do it the first and the last time in their life. So we need to understand the technologies, how to conduct a mega event successfully. For example, business is working on to the benefit of its clients, and it's trying to enhance the products according to the client's needs. So that's appropriate for the organization of mega events. We need to understand our target client audience and to plan everything according to them. And we also need to implement a project approach. We need to understand it and to do it correctly, which was done in Kazan and in Sochi. Such an intellectual capital exists in our country. So thank you. So thank you very much. I'm very happy that all the speakers stick to the time limits, and they raise a lot of crucial issues in this connection. And I think that the most important moments for me in this report are the following, and I will start from the end. So if the mega event has happened already, we need to understand how to maximize its effect, and we need to understand the coordination of the mega event with the strategy of the city, and it's a principal moment. And I think that's why Barcelona is the best example of a successful conduction of a mega event. And in this case, we understand why did the city need the event. And so the first question was connected with making decisions, with measuring the positive effects, but we have also the issue of not saying yes or no to the event. We need to measure the costs, the expenditures. So how should we approach this issue, and are there any tools to solve the matter? So thank you. I think all large-scale events have a stage at which cities, before applying, need to decide whether to apply or not. And as I've already said, the organizers usually do it not once, twice, or 3 times. They usually do it once. So as a rule, you have to overcome this problem from scratch and to deal with it. And I can say that our company takes part in such a process, and it helps a city to understand whether it's worth applying or not. There is a certain approach, a certain format. We take all direct and indirect expenses, which will become the burden for the city during the organization of the event. Of course, we don't evaluate the costs themselves. We evaluate the costs together with the effect. And so we compare the expenses with the effect, and sometimes an effect can be an intangible asset. And so the people making the decision need to take into account the overall picture. So it's not only the issue of costs. Of course, it's a goal, but it's not an only one. Because when you try to understand whether you have enough money for a car or not, it's not the only factor which helps you to make the decision. You need to understand whether you need it, what purposes you have, and whether your family members will approve of this purchase. So thank you very much. I agree with the fact that it's difficult to evaluate all the effects, but practice has shown that the expenses and the costs and the evaluation of costs isn't precise one usually, because even the Olympics in London accounted for $9 billion, but not for 2, as it had been predicted before the Olympics. So, but a lot of principle and quite contradictory ideas were stipulated about the effects of the mega events. On the one hand, Yelena Trubina was quite skeptical about mega events and about mega events as a drivers of growth, because it's difficult to take into account an alternative scenario. On the other hand, Mr. Lavelle has said that mega events can give impetus for powerful processes in the city. And Evgeny Atnelchenko, in his turn, said that positive effects can be various, and it's complicated to describe all of them and to take into account in the overall concept. And it expands our notion of mega events. But there are a lot of different points of view, and I'd like to give the floor to the government of Moscow. And the question I'd like to ask, there are actually 2 questions I'd like to ask, and I'd like to address them to Oleg Bocharov. The first one, why does Moscow need to host mega events, including the World Cup, and what can Moscow expect in this regard?
Thanks a lot. I will definitely answer those questions, but I will answer them as a politician because I'm quite new in my recent role. I would like to join the opinions stated in the 3 previous speeches, but I would like to add something. Have you been ever happy with the costs of your birthday, of your wife's birthday? I think it's a classical social model which can be scaled, and the issues are the same for my minor event or for a mega event. Of course, I will spend more than I would like to spend, and of course, I will have less pleasure than I would like to have. If I go back to my younger years, I can remember the New Year holiday. How big a holiday was it? There was plenty of food, little official, little solemn events, and the parents went to bed, and the kids were free to do whatever they chose. So that's in our mentality. But you're quite right in saying that every mega event is a bomb. All the costs are fundraised together, and then it explodes, and so what? And the city is aware of its goal. It forms a special mega model for a mega event because only it can help us, because a one-time action, even if it has maximum effects, it brings the nation together, it increases the authority, but nevertheless, all the expectations which happen during these days or weeks have to be maintained. That's why the city has create a wave of mega events. Of course, you cannot have Olympic Games in Russia every half a year, and even less so in Moscow. But if we take 2013, only Moscow, due to its Congress infrastructure, did hold 565 congresses and 200 trade fairs. And the aggregate number of participants would be estimated at about 1 million. Maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more, but it's about 1 million. Too bad those events are not linked into one chain. That's why the Department of Science, Industrial Development and Policy decided to create a special infrastructural bureau which would plan its development, its current infrastructure well beforehand, 5 years in advance. And we should activate this infrastructure before the event, and we should maintain the interest in it even after. This is quite a natural trend for the city. We're maintaining the industry. We're creating open space in the city. You can visit all those fairs. It's not a one-time event. It is being held 4 times a year. You can go walk on the street. So it's like vacations or holidays, but during vacations you always have queues only in popular places. Are people ready for that? Are they prepared to be happy for so long? Will their family budgets withhold that? The city has to balance all that. In 2013, we have calculated that before 2025, we will keep developing. And we have certain mega events which are going on worldwide. Large expo events, and we can attract them to our city 1 year earlier or 1 year later. It takes a lot of managerial effort. We keep contacts with large-scale companies. We do some elementary planning. In this case, we can see the economic effects, economic benefits which we can get through this synergy. But the planning should be quite clear. This does not relate to only one event. Why I'm always scolding at my mother-in-law. So I have to buy everything on the last day, on the eve of her birthday. If I have a network of professionals, I can do it much cheaper. I have partners with whom I have long-term relationships. I can have life cycle contracts for lots of procurement items. I change people, and there are many people who know the language. You cannot be an English interpreter and, of course, work as a simultaneous interpreter. Well, it does mean that I can work as a simultaneous interpreter at two different fairs, because there are two English languages. The terminology is different, the mindset is different. Engineering is one subject. It's not even about language. During communication, it's mandatory to clearly understand what you're talking about. No one knows what the economy, post-industrial economy, would be like. It'll be an information economy. It doesn't say anything in particular, but this story which pertains to communication, this story which relates to the penetration of intellect worldwide, with harsh individualization. Everyone in the city has to find their own place in this structure. That's our goal, and we'll see the result within the coming year. I would like to make one remark. Unlike your mother-in-law's birthday, Olympic Games can be held or not held. So you have two options. Oh, you can go fishing if you don't want the birthday. The one important idea is that a mega event can be viewed as not a one-time event, but as a strategy, systematic strategy for the city. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Prudnikov, who is an expert in congressional activities, and I would invite you to comment this systematic strategy from Congress activities in Moscow. Thanks, Dmitry. I would like to resume what the previous speaker was said. The main idea is that it's not a self-sustainable goal to hold an event. An event is a tool. For politicians, it's an indicative tool. Only two events can be called global events and fairs and Olympics. All the other events are much less important in their cost, in their importance, and so on and so forth. There are many examples of. So it's not the city who applies for a mega event. The state does that. From the political view, it's done by the government, which holds the event to demonstrate a change in its status, or an attempt to bring this change about. You're giving an example of Barcelona. As you remember, Spain conducted two events at the same time. It was Expo Sevilla and the Barcelona Olympic Games. That's what China did in 2008. It was Beijing Olympics and Shanghai Expo. In China, the Olympics have shown that China was no longer a developing country, and the Expo showed that there is G2 in the world. And the journalists always like numbers. Could you please display my presentation? I will give you some numbers. There were multiple pieces of research by American economists in the sphere of Olympic Games, much less so in international expos. May I have a remote control device? Everything has been calculated. There are universally acknowledged methodologies. What kind of costs do we talk about? Let's say in China. What are the costs for a global event? In Beijing, 600 new roads had been built before the Olympics. A new terminal for the airport were built. Railroad terminals were constructed. It took several $100 billion. $20 billion were allocated for sewer systems, and only $2 billion were allocated for the construction of Olympic venues, so it was not a self-sustainable goal. The goal was to develop the whole infrastructure, engineering infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. I consulted, well, our country applied for the 22nd Summer Olympics and 22nd Winter Olympics, and it has never held international expos. In 1963, this victory was turned down by the government, and our application for 2000 of Moscow and 2020 for Ekaterinburg were turned down by international authorities. And our colleagues in Italy have elaborated on a very interesting methodology. It was not just about holding a mega event, but the preparation gives a certain event as well. And this there is a preparatory period. Apart from that, when there is a main goal, then a mega event can be used as a tool to achieve that goal. Thank you. Well, we have touched upon this main issue of being aware of the key goal. But I think you have systematically given a proof that's where we are done with the first block. And the one question which we have approached is that we can draw a line between two aspects in terms of benefits from mega events. Does a city make a decision on a mega event, and how conscious this decision can be? And when the mega event takes place, what are the conditions needed to maximize this positive effect? I would ask one question from Elena Trubina. She's our main skeptic at this table. And my question would be, if the situation is like this, that the mega event it's not decided by the city whether it is held or not, is it worth to express certain skeptical opinion, and how to maximize the effect of the events which are imposed on the cities? I would, of course, agree with the numbers, with the figures which pertain to the Beijing Olympics, and I was entitled with the social part of the events. But the price for the Beijing Olympics were 1.5 million people displaced from their places of dwelling. They had to free their dwellings. They had to move their businesses, not always beneficially for them. And I think that we can get a better understanding of the legacy of mega events when we take into account that countries differ. There are democratic countries, authoritarian countries, and we would be better off comparing our Russian situation with other emerging economies, the BRICS countries. Let's look at Brazil. The number and the amount of public unrest due to the upcoming Olympic Games and the World Championship. If we read more attentively how the Chinese express their opinions on the Olympics, we will see that the whole picture of the situation, even when the country wins the right to hold a mega event, is much more diverse. So that's why skepticism is always needed.
Indeed.
Please.
Just to pick up on something that Evgeny said about the intangible benefits, and the fact of the skilling of the workforce, of the people involved in the event. Not only do those new skills and expertise stay inside your country, but it becomes a big export benefit that you can use as a country. And you know, our practice, Populous, we're proof of that. Our Winter Olympic schools began in Salt Lake City, and the guys who worked with us back then are still working with us now. They work with us in Sochi and so on. And in my case, Sydney, 2000. So that's a huge industry, actually. It's a you know, and it's a way of projecting soft power out there as well. So if you looked at Sochi, the planning that went into the bid, and we worked together on a lot of that. If you look at that, there was, I don't know, dozens of Australians there and dozens of Americans. And then in Brazil, it was people from London 2012 involved in the overlay. So there's a continuity there. So I would say that this is a very significant resource that you've got to look at. And even now, rather than in the organising committee offices of 2018 for FIFA World Cup, 3/4 of the technical and managerial staff there have come straight from Sochi. And they'll be going to the next one and the next one and the one after that, you know. And so this is, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I think you can probably add to that in a lot of other ways, Evgeny. Then on the social and skilling of the populist sort of sphere, this is a very significant effect.
Вот я хотел бы еще один
I would like to add one more argument to the non-tangible assets. The consumption society becomes more and more stale in their souls. So if in Moscow it is very noticeable, it has been noticeable over the last 2 decades, the number of volunteers who came as such to the Sochi Olympics and the effect that they're creating in Sochi is maximum in terms of non-tangible assets. It's about their changed mindset and the joy and delight which they derive from supporting their neighbors, from loving their neighbors. Thanks a lot. And we see that we have different opinions, varying opinions at this table. We have skeptics, we have experts who state that the diversity of the effects does vindicate their existence. I would like to move on to the second block of our session, which is dedicated to micro-level questions of how the city can make use of the infrastructural objects, of the assets which it gains due to mega events. I would like to give the floor to Valdemar Weiss, who will share his experience of managing stadia, which is interesting for Russia after 2018. Can you please switch on the presentation? Dear colleagues, the presentation is not there yet. Of course, there is place for improvisation in everything. So my topic would be the creation of monetary flows on retail objects, including sports objects, which are some of the most challenging objects, which have a very big political component to them. We see a transformation from ancient arenas to modern commercial stadiums, which work 24/7 all the year round and bring joy and delight to people. That's what Elena has mentioned, joy and delight for local people due to their multi-purpose nature, and they're not just structures for one day only. They meant to create a certain atmosphere, certain environment in the city, so that every day you feel like it's your birthday, your own birthday, not your mother-in-law's. You see what happens when the management is not perfect or is not present at all. And our colleague, Mr. Bocharov, said that they have a certain department for congresses and conferences. They create a whole structure for preparing the cities and their population to maintain that working conditions before and after the event. That's the rowing channel in China, and much of its cost was just buried under the ground. Given the modern technologies, especially Western ones, and the new managerial practices, it's not too difficult to build the infrastructure. It's difficult to preserve their value, preserve their significance. It's this SKA Stadium in Rostov-on-Don. But we know that if the Acropole in Athens had been treated properly, it would never be ruined. We can see some of the trends in Moscow and other cities in Russia. The government is very active in solving this question. They're creating the points of social attraction. They inscribe it into the social infrastructure of the cities. The event venues become not only places for sports competition. In 2002, 365 events, 62 events are being carried out every year. So at the stage at the design stage, its entertainment significance was never considered, which would then serve the citizens and people. And if it was not considered, it's much more expensive to add it to these sports objects. We can see that especially in Great Britain and Germany, sports stadia become multifunctional tourist objects. They can host events of different kinds, exhibitions, congresses, fairs, cinema broadcasts, and so on and so forth. About 49% of the income from them, including the incomes from television, are accounted for by their main purpose. So that's stadiums and sports. All the rest is effective management. The object has to live every day, and modern objects become centers of development for modern cities, especially London. Sports parks attract, or we could say they encompass not just the city, but the whole country, and they become objects of international tourism. They become pivots of social communication for people of different ages. They develop exactly what the colleagues have mentioned, modern technologies, and these very technologies allow us to earn money. I'm not calling upon you to transform sports facilities into markets. We had such a practice in Russia, such a stage of our development. But the commercial aspect has always to be present. What we see in this picture is specialized sports trade, parks of different kinds, different facilities for kids, educational facilities. All kinds of events have to be non-stop in these facilities. All of them enable us to gain more and more income and to keep them involved in the life of the city and the country. I'm out of time, so thank you.
So please make some conclusion. So I think everyone caught up the main idea, so thank you for being brief and for deepening the idea of Mr. Lavelle. The city must not think only horizontally, but also look over this horizon of the mega event to think how these objects can be used, how facilities can be used after the mega event. And of course, a lot of objects and facilities were temporary during the London Olympics, and for others, a special strategy was devised, and I think it's a very important message. And now I'd like to switch to our last presenter, and he will introduce a bit different attitude towards the conduction of mega events. Scott McQuire, please.
Very much, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me. Yeah, I am going to talk about something a bit different, which is large screens, because one of the distinctive features of mega events like Olympic Games and FIFA World Cups over the last 10 years or so is the number of people who watch them in so-called live sites. So they're watching them without actually going to the stadium. And I think this is part of that discussion around intangible benefits. But I'm not really talking so much about the skills of the professional population. I'm talking about the involvement of citizens. I'm talking about the capacity to create new forms of social communication and therefore the skilling up of the population as citizens. I think we've had a lot of discussion about different models of measuring costs and benefits. I think the language has shifted quite a bit over the last decade. In relation to London, there was focus on, and Damon mentioned this word in his presentation a number of times, but focus on legacy. So focus on how you're going to reuse the infrastructure after the event. But I think the other really distinctive thing about London was the ambition to involve the national population in the Games. It was a part of the London Organising Committee's bid to win the Olympic Games that they were going to involve the whole national population, not just in the City of London, but all around that. And their live sites, their large screens that they had spread all around the country, were a really important part of that. And this built on a particular history. So if you go back about 10 years, the BBC started what they called a public space broadcasting project. There's a screen in Manchester, was established in 2003. There's a screenshot from 2005. The difference with these kinds of screens that started up around then, they're what I'd call second generation urban screens. There's a couple on the right in the UK. There's one from the city I come from in Melbourne on the left. Second generation urban screens. Sorry, you can't. Okay, I'll get closer. Second generation urban screens. Unlike the screens you'll see in Times Square and Shinjuku in Tokyo, they're not high up on buildings, they're not dominated by advertising, they're not display only. They tend to be more integrated into the urban space. They tend to be lower down, facing onto pedestrian areas, so people can gather there. They tend to have a range of different content options available, so they're not dominated just by commercial messages. And they often have had, experiments with interactive design and so on and so forth. This is the shot of the screen in Melbourne at Federation Square. Oh, you've got 3 different slides for me. So you can see the way that this screen actually opens up onto what's almost a classical amphitheatre space, slightly sloping. The crowd can gather there to watch different kinds of events. In the context of London, LOCOG took over a network of screens developed by the BBC in 2008. The ambition was to build up to 50 screens all around the UK for the Olympics. You can get a very different type of involvement from the crowd facing an urban screen. This is a shot from a crowd watching a sporting event on a large screen, and you can see the kind of emotional involvement that people have got, even though they're not actually present at the event. So the network of live sites, because of the impact of the global financial crisis, was scaled down. But by the time London 2012 came on, there was 24 permanent large screens built all around the UK, as well as a number of temporary installations. And I think it's interesting when you look at the way the screens work in the games, that they give you a number of different opportunities. They provide a place for the public to gather. So this is an important thing, that people who don't have a ticket can still become part of the event. They can gather together, not in their own living room, not isolated, but actually congregating together. They become a focus for the media, because the media will often go down there to cover what the audience are doing in these spaces. They offer sponsors some valuable opportunities, so this is part of the financing of these kinds of events now. You can see that this live site in Manchester is dressed for the occasion with sponsors, tents and so on. And they actually allow the fans to perform different modes of national identity. So you can actually see people come along, not just from the host country, but from other countries, carrying their flags, wearing national costumes, etc., and being part of that kind of buzz. And I think this is a really important part of how the population in the UK got involved in the game. So this is shots from the Olympic Park, where there was a double-sided screen. So the conclusions I think we can draw from this. Urban communication structures like large screens are an increasingly important part of how we function in cities. One of the important things about urban screens is, unlike personal mobile devices, they're not directed at the individual, they're directed at bringing people together in public space to share an experience together. I think this is a really important aspect. A lot of cities are becoming aware of this in the present, that social connection is an increasingly important asset for a city, overcoming loneliness, increasing well-being, increasing happiness. Elena was raising the question earlier, does the feel-good factor disappear too quickly? I think the language for this has changed over the last 10 years. With Sydney, people were talking about stage the Olympic Games as a matter of national pride. But now I think we're thinking about how do we actually encourage the national population to come together to experience different forms of civic participation. Volunteering was mentioned before, but I think it's also a way of building important social capital. It's interesting when you look at the survey the BBC did in the aftermath of London 2012, they did a survey in 2013. Despite the very high cost of the Olympics, and these kinds of events are much more expensive because of the security costs in particular, about 2/3 of the population said it was worth the money, and about 3/4 of the population said they would like the Games to come back to the UK. And I think this level of involvement of national populations in the Games is part of securing consent to the event and part of the reason why they were seen as a success. One thing I would say about this kind of infrastructure that is now built in the UK, they have these 24 screens that are still being operative, so they're still used to support events in the city centres that they're operating in. For instance, the one we have in Melbourne, it doesn't have to be a live telecast of a sporting event. We've used it to stage live interactive events to screens in other cities. For instance, this is a hip-hop dance battle that was staged between Melbourne, Perth, which is another Australian city, and Seoul in Korea. So you could do that kind of connectivity between central city spaces in different cities, and you get large numbers of the population coming together to encounter each other in new ways. So I think when we're thinking about evaluation, this kind of capacity to energise a city and to increase social capital is an important part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I think this is a great example of how creative you can be in thinking what the benefits of mega events could be. And this is a very different angle, the one I actually haven't heard of before. So thank you for bringing it in. The one very specific question I have for you, and I hope you can answer it shortly, is it always a positive experience, public screens? I'll tell you one story, and I think people here know about it. 2002 World Cup, Russia is playing Japan. There's a big screen on Manezhny Square just outside here. We lose, we don't qualify. The crowd goes roaming up Tverskaya Street, destroying and breaking all the windows in all the shops. It was a public screen. Since then, although they were banned in Russia for a while, now they started introducing them, but they're in heavily controlled areas with a lot of security. So is there only positive about the screens, and how would you comment that story?
Yeah, look, I think you've answered your own question to some extent, but it's not the screen in itself. The screen is a technology, the screen is a tool, it's the culture of use. I could cite similar stories from Liverpool in particular, where there was riots and fights around football, and that was the only screen I know of that's been shut down in the UK. But mostly the screens have been successful, and mostly they have been very positive. And I think for the kind of intercultural exchange that I've talked about, they have been very successful.
Okay, thank you. Quick comment.
Just very briefly, when you mentioned the example of the screens in Moscow, when you look at the way the screens were used in Gorky Park, which I experienced directly during the World Cup here, it raises the new paradigm where these environments that are centred around the screen become places, particularly if they're connected to somewhere like Gorky Park, they become places where you can engage with to whatever degree you like. And now that we all are plugged into social media, you can either meet your friends there, you know somebody is there, somebody's down at the cafe around the corner in Gorky Park, you can migrate across that, then you can sort of go back and watch a little bit more of it. And particularly with the case in Moscow, where the time difference was so great to Brazil, and also Luzhniki, the screen there, is that you could make a whole kind of 6-hour evening out of it in the summer. So it was a great sort of new experiment, I think, kind of almost uniquely, I think, in Moscow because of that time difference and because of the excitement of the fact that Russia is hosting the next one. So there was a great level of interest there, and I think I saw some really new things about how people use those spaces. Not just the space itself. Talk about the legacy. These were all temporary. Yeah. In the kind of London tradition, these were temporary overlay venue spaces, but they gave rise to a whole new way of experiencing the city, which I thought was very interesting.
Thank you, Damon. На мой взгляд, очень интересный комментарий именно потому.
I think it's a very interesting comment, because there are different examples of using such a tool in Russia, public screens, both positive and negative, and a positive experience is largely connected with the enhancement of integration of the large screens in the city fabric. And I'd like to address the representative of the government of Moscow and to listen to their point of view. A lot of facilities are constructed in Moscow in the wake of before the Football World Championship. And I'd like to address Andrei Bochkarev. So can you give your point of view on these two issues about stadiums and about screens and some other facilities and some possible profits which can be procured? So I'd like to comment on the statements of all the participants, because we implement large-scale programs in Moscow, and undoubtedly any task and any goal has both enthusiasts and skeptics. And of course, you're absolutely right that Moscow invests annually in different objects approximately $20 billion for all the facilities, underground, hospitals, roads, sport facilities, and many others. And believe me, even when we are constructing a simple kindergarten, we have both enthusiasts and skeptics. So another point which was dwelt upon, any mega event is first and foremost and serves for the long-term interests of a state and a nation, and some people confuse it with the long-term interest of the elite. But part of people doesn't understand the short-term benefits for themselves. The benefits from the Olympics, the benefits of the work of our colleagues on the World Championship in Brazil, and we scrutinized the results and we worked out the results in details, and we implement a lot of methods and tools in making our decisions, trying to avoid our colleagues have faced or have stumbled, and it would be very useful for us, in particular during the construction of different facilities of our own canal. It's a massive reconstruction, which was used only for the rowing World Cup, gave in effect that we have 30 sports schools and more than 2,000 participants, 2,000 newcomers in the rowing, and so we have achieved the return on the investment. We have another facility, Luzhniki Stadium. It will be the core of the Football World Cup of 2018. The major overhaul will account for $700 million, but 90% of time we spent not only for the preparation of the World Cup, but also for the regime of legacy. So what will this stadium do in future? How will it earn money after the World Cup? And there is a wonderful remark. If a new facility is being constructed, then a financial business model is established, and after that everything else is done. And in Luzhniki we have to preserve the walls because they're historic ones, but for us, the base is the financial business model of a future facility, and all the projects are implemented in the long-term perspective of this aspect. So we thinking about the fact how it will enable to earn money in the future. And so I think all people present here have dwelt upon all the aspects of mega events. But the main point is that we need to take into account the interests of different strata, to take into account different goals, and to make it not only the investment of large amounts of money, but also to give an impetus to the development of intangible assets, technologies, making decisions, staff members. It gives development, it gives rise to other related industries. Everyone knows that Manor Game said that one a ruble invested in an object gives 5 rubles or $5 in the economy of related industries. So the construction of any object and facility, a road, a stadium, an Olympics facilities, multiplies the development of the country. For example, colleagues have mentioned the twofold increase of tourist flows in Kazan after the student games, and the enhancement of the transport infrastructure prepared for the Olympics, and which is preserved in Sochi, is regarded by the city dwellers as one of the most positive effects during all the time. And so we need to find this balance. We need to make the decision on all the stages, starting from global goals and ending up with micro operations for all our steps to yield not only short-term effects, but long-term effects as well. And in Moscow, in Russia, we are working over that, and we are quite happy about what we have achieved, and we hope that the World Cup will give not only short-term effects, but only long-term investment into the development of the country. So, besides the Congress and exhibition activity, we are responsible for innovations as well. And I'd like to tell Scott that we had a mega event of the parliamentary level, and we have placed 7,000 cameras. 7,000 cameras all over the country, and they were our screens because any citizen could watch these parliamentary elections and call us and say if there were any violations in the run of the elections. So it was the so-called large screen for the whole city. So, and of course we can regard these events from the point of view of innovations, and I think that once even your big screens were comprised from different small-scale screens. So everything has its start and then evolves. And of course, there are depressive industrial zones in the city. And one industrial zone, which is called Moskvich, was transformed in the run of the 2 years, and now it's the venue for the Innovation Forum, which is an international event, and it has approximately 60,000 square meters of the territory, and it hosts a lot of innovative companies. They're waiting for the end of the forum every year to unfold their activity. And we also had school children who visited the venue to watch the exhibition, and they say that the territory of our industrial district has something to be proud of, and the whole world can be proud of this experiment. And school children can visit this exhibition, and it can be a kind of goal for them, a kind of understanding what they want to do in future. And so it gives some flexible opportunities for different families and children. And we transformed our attitude towards education for our children to implement their skills. For example, children need to understand whether they are good at economy or they are good at intellectual activities or engineering professions. So it gives a leap for acceleration of modern industries, and we are dealing with this issue to transform different zones and different districts, industrial districts in Moscow, for people to have a chance who want to come here and to work here to make something, because people want to come and they want to see what the city can give. And we are talking only about sport events, but it's just a narrow segment. But we need to understand other events which can be conducted. And of course, I'm not only talking about the Technopark Forum together with Skolkovo, and now Technoparks from all over the world will come to us, and we will share experience with them, and that's what we are proud of, because we can share with you our achievements in the engineering sphere. And we have the World Congress of Entrepreneurs, which was held in Moscow as well, and it's another sphere represented. So I think that for the modern megalopolis, the establishment of such a club atmosphere and environment is very important, and we invite you, our guests, in our Congress atmosphere, and we will invite you to other events which can be interesting for you, both from the point of view of professional promotion and development of your urban ideas. For example, why not visit a fair which is nearby? So, and the last important thought, I think it's important to mention an idea which has been dwelt upon here. The time which is needed for any life, starting from a cell and ending up with a human, this time demands synergy of our results. And in this regard, the mega event must be recognized in another scale.
Мне очень, приятно во многом смысле.
It's been a very interesting thought, and it's very interesting to hear that Moscow has a very systemic and creative approach to mega events. But may we have 5 more minutes to resume our discussion, because I would like to give the floor to one of my first teachers. It's Mr. Trudnev, who would like to bring forward one aspect of mega events which we haven't touched upon. It's important that this aspect is being voiced here. Thanks, Dmitry. The question is like this. The aspect has not been touched upon is law. I would like to address this question to our international colleagues. Have you had a precedent when you had to make an exclusive federal law for a certain mega event, for a certain point in your country, like it was in Sochi? If it was the case, was this experience translated to other points in the territory of the state, such as the territory of New Moscow, such as simplified takeover of property?
For Moscow, and I'm honestly, this is a question of reasonable, like least evil or something around those issues. And Elena raised the question of relocations in Beijing. So how do we square that circle? Is that the way to go? What's the legal way?
Well, Moscow region has Park Russia project near the airport, which I think has arisen due to some special legislation. There was the expansion of Moscow region south, encompassing Skolkovo recently. So if I understand the question correctly, is it a practice which is common outside of the Russian Federation for special legislation to provide incentives for development? The answer is certainly...
I don't think it's about incentives. It's mostly...
Okay, well, let's look at... I showed some work from London. We looked at the O2 arena, and we looked at Stratford. Now, clearly, to get the fast train project, which ultimately ends up in Paris, to stop at Stratford, that required special legislation. It required special agreements with the 5 boroughs, with the GLA, central government. If we look at in between that and the O2. The O2, as I said, Greenwich Peninsula was a blighted site in the heart of the city, a huge area on the river, surrounded by something like 4 million people, which was blighted for decades. Due to special legislation, the environment was cleaned up. It hosted as a special millennial event, special funding to clean it up, to remediate the whole site. Now it's the most successful venue in the world. You mentioned 300 events plus a year. It has all sorts of, it's a multifunctional venue. It has people living around it, has universities. It has catalysed and stimulated a whole new district of London as a result of special legislation to enable special funding to go and clean up that site. And then private capital came in. Private capital from all over the world. The Anschutz Entertainment Group, who run the O2, including the arena inside it, that's a US-based corporation. In between, Greenwich Peninsula and Stratford, we have an even older example, which dates from the early 80s, which is the enterprise zone of London Docklands. Look at that now. Look at Canary Wharf. It's the biggest. You have Moscow City here. They're both the same. You know, it's vital to have this. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's vital.
Но можно говорить и про второе.
We could talk about the second city in London. I have 17 years of experience as a legislator. Not a single event does without a law, and better said, without a system of laws. Amendments to the budget, amendments to the taxation laws. Every country has found its own solution to how it prepares for a mega event. And civil legislation comes into play when we balance private and common interest. We have two sides of that. If we talk about democracy, we know the situation with the Warszawskoye Highway, which goes around one single house. We spent billions of dollars on that. But when I was a deputy, one district was relocated, and I didn't see a family which would change 1 meter for 1 meter exactly. They wanted to get 3 meters of new dwelling for 1 meter of their old one. And I can tell you that this attempt to show that our experience is unique in certain aspects in terms of balance of interest, no, it's not true. If you look at industrial zones, you cannot redevelop all the industrial zones because one proprietor would, of course, want to get 3 times the adequate reimbursement for his property. So we need to regulate the rights of everyone when we regulate when we evaluate those rights, and not a single urban development solution cannot be adopted without discussion, without public discussion. For example, the construction of the Leninsky Highway was cancelled after consultations with the population, and the mayor took the appropriate decision. We shall not perform that reconstruction. It's important how these laws are brought into life, and how eager is the power to listen to people. Thanks for your feedback. Thanks for your input. I would resume this discussion for a long time, and it followed the pattern which I would like it to follow. We had different viewpoints here. I would like to sum it up. The first issue which was raised is, why does the city need the Olympics or other mega events? Of course, the cities sometimes do not make this decision to hold the Olympics, to host the Olympics, because there are bigger assignments, bigger goals on the national scale. But you can see the results, and the infrastructure is built in the city. Everything happens at the scale of the city. So if we think about the effect of the Olympics or another mega event, we should think of it on the level of the city. And that's one of the conclusions of our today's discussion. Another conclusion would be that the benefits which can be expected from mega events have many aspects to them, and not all of them can be predicted at the design stage. But I think we have discussed them very profoundly, and it's important to have a strategic view of the benefits and be creative in our approach. And Scott's speech was very instrumental in that. There are certain effects which I have never thought about, although I authored several articles on the topic. One other conclusion is that you can look at mega events from a different perspective, not just a large bomb, a large cycle of urban development. For me, it's a good surprise to hear such a viewpoint from the government of Moscow. And finally, I would like to add such a global idea which would resonate with Elena's ideas. There are some branded events. It's a message to those who runs these events, who manages them. If you plan an urban event, it has to be adequate to the city's size. And today's expos have become monsters which are much larger than the city scale. I don't know what they are aimed at. They're aimed at the global audience. They do not take into account the interests of the city. So I would like this view to be more strategic, and the organizations which run them would change their opinions and approaches. This discussion has exceeded my expectations, and I'm sorry for the audience not being involved, but we have a strict time frame. Thank you, and have a good forum. Thank you.